Welcome to a homegrown family podcast where we grow the produce and the kids. Hey everybody, welcome to Homegrown Family Podcast. We're talking about anything from growing your own garden vegetables to raising livestock to hunting and fishing and everything in between. We also talk a little bit about the family side of things every once in a while, talking about homeschooling, different topics and things like that. So welcome aboard. Thanks for joining us. So today we're having a little overview or recap of our orchard activities. And for those of you guys who haven't listened in a while or haven't listened to past episodes, we have a little 2-acre, acre and a half plot of land that's fenced off from the deer over at my dad's place that has a bunch of grapes and apples, currants, blackberries, all sorts of different fruits and things that we use and grow. And yeah, today we're going to talk a little bit about that and kind of how this year went. And joining me, I have my brother David. Morning, David.
Morning, everyone. Happy to be here again. It's been a little while, so just as a reminder, I'm the one who does more of the growing and starting of plants in the family for the orchard and for garden stuff. I have a horticultural background, so that's kind of what I like to do, and so I help out in that way. And Joe's he's the brewing guru. Like, he does all the, ciders and wines and things like that. So we'll kind of switch off on what we're talking about here.
Yeah, we have a lot of the same interests professionally and as hobbies. So, yeah. He also has a little more garden space than I do, so he does a lot more canning and things like that as well. But we definitely enjoy the fruits of our labors. And actually, that's kind of one of the cool things I think about a large family is that David has some issues with some kind of squash bug beetle problem back where he lives.
It's a vine squash borer, and it makes it really hard to grow any pumpkins or squash unless they're resistant to it. And the only one that I have that I want to grow is a butternut squash. They don't bother that one.
Yeah, so David grows butternut squashes since I have too small of a garden to grow any pumpkins or squash really without having issues. Then Mom was kind of growing some more like the pumpkins and sugar babies and all that type of stuff and zucchinis and things. I'm kind of the mooch, I guess, in some ways, that I get a little bit of everything from everybody.
Right, but it's nice. We're kind of spread out, and we can each grow something. And obviously, you get too much of that one thing, so then we just kind of swap things around. I give Mom some squash. She gives me some of the pumpkins that I can't grow, and it's great.
Yeah, I guess maybe in return they give them some wine, and stuff like that. So,
which is a lot of work.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising sometimes how much time I put into that. My basement is definitely, recently it smelled a lot like a brewery, so, which is either sometimes a good thing. I always worry because every time I start brewing and, it takes 2 or 3 days for the yeaster to get going, and every once in a while I'll get one that blows its top on its airlock and gets foam and yeasty smell everywhere. So the first day I smell the yeast in, the basement, I'm like, it smells really good. And I'm like, oh wait, oh no, thinking that a top blew. If it's airtight like it should be, you really shouldn't smell a whole lot of that. But if it lingers some, then I'm kind of get worried. But that's kind of a cool thing with our family is that we kind of share a lot of our resources. And same thing goes with meat. Dad's very generous with his meat that he has. Whether it be pork or beef or chickens. Ducks occasionally. He's always very, very generous with that and, giving meat to us siblings and things like that. You hear sometimes some stories, or I've seen some different Facebook ads like, hey, we want to pass along the generational food. My dad gave us a food for, beef for Christmas every single year kind of thing. And it's good enough meat for the whole entire year. And then, that kind of thing. So that's something that's kind of neat and something I look forward to try to do a little more of if I ever end up in a home setting, rural setting, is to be able to do that kind of same thing in return for my children, to be able to help provide them some of that meat, because we're very fortunate that in some of these economic times, where it gets a little bit tougher and the inflation rate goes up and this and that, at least we're not buying £5 or $5 hamburger at the store, So by the time you have processing fees and things like that, we're maybe spending $2 a pound, I'm guessing, or something like that. But that's not even me, that's Dad. So we're very fortunate that way. We're fortunate that, we're able to do a little bit of salmon or pronghorn hunting, fishing, but the cheapest one for us would be venison, the deer in our backyard. We're fortunate that Dad has land to be able to do that. And so that fills up the bulk of our freezer every year is probably that venison portion of things. So, yeah. So, anyways, that's always kind of a side segue there. But I'm very fortunate. And so we're very fortunate to have this orchard, to have apples. David's been going hard at the juice train.
Yeah. So I guess just to look at the orchard here, there's a lot of maintenance involved, and sometimes I overlook some things. Maybe you gotta make sure you fertilize everything appropriately, and it's a hobby, right? It's not a commercial business, so there's not always the attention to detail that there should be. So this year, we had a really wet spring and probably leached out some of our nutrients from our soil. It's a fairly low organic matter, sandy type of a soil. And so this spring, we had a favorable winter, pretty mild. Blackberry production was actually pretty good this year. Normally it's a zone 5 type of a plant, and my parents are, borderline 3, 4. And so you usually have a lot of dieback, and you only get a few blackberries from pretty close to the crown that survive the winter to produce fruit. But this year they picked a lot of blackberries, so that was great.
Yeah, we actually had enough blackberries for me to be able to do a blackberry cider. So I'm looking forward to trying that out.
Yeah, Joe normally doesn't get blackberries to waste on cider. That's usually like a dessert and fresh eating thing, but
Yeah.
It's probably going to be really good though. So another thing that we pick early on is Juneberries. We had a pretty decent Juneberry crop, but I think I could probably fertilize those maybe a little bit more, have a little nicer crop there. Tart cherries, those actually produced a little bit this year, but if I remember correctly, the birds got those.
We put a net around them a little bit too late, I think, but or they got up underneath them or something. But the cultivar we planted there was Romeo and Juliet, I believe. And
Romeo, Juliet, and then Carmen Jewel. I think we had three plants there.
So I'm looking forward to those kind of producing more in the upcoming years.
Yeah, we just got to get a better net system for those. And then the grapes were growing extremely well this spring. Actually, we had a few of our wires break for our trellis system.
Oh, yeah.
So Dad and I had to go out and kind of prop up the grapes while we mended the trellis. And so this winter, after we're done pruning and stuff, I need to get out there and retighten and support some of those wires, because you can get a lot of weight, a lot of growth on those wires. And I think we just stretched them in a few spots and they snapped. So
yeah, one of the problems with those vigorous grapes too was that the vines and the bunches were all so dense, and we're kind of like an old patch of woods, so we don't get a lot of breeze through there. But we had a couple issues on a couple of cultivars with just like some white mold. What was it, white mold?
Yeah, powdery mildew. Yeah.
Powdery mildew. Yeah. So we had to spray for that a couple times.
Yeah, that hasn't been an issue in the past. Like Joe alluded to, we don't have a lot of airflow. In a dry year, it doesn't matter, but in a wet year like this, they don't dry out as well. And so one cultivar, I believe it was the Frontenac Blanc, especially had that powdery mildew on it. But we spray a few times for powdery mildew, anthracnose, bunch rot. For the most part, the grapes look pretty good when we harvested this fall, but we were a little nutrient deficient in potassium. And so
before we get to the potassium bit there, Dave, what did we spray on for the powdery mildew? I know we did sulfur one time, and that seemed to do pretty decent, and that's kind of like an organic product, I guess. Then we did use some other product that was non-organic, but we're not organic wine producer by any means or anything like that, but it was some more commercialized product that we used the second time around. So we did 2 applications. I think David sprayed on the sulfur, and then I sprayed on the other product afterwards. He's like, yeah, you better hit it again just in case the sulfur didn't work very well. And I actually went through it as I was spraying that second product on. I thought the grapes had recovered pretty well from just the sulfur application. So I was kind of impressed by that. We must have had pretty decent coverage to be able to kind of help combat that.
Yeah, so that other product was called Elevate 50, and I would have to go read the label to tell you exactly what that was again. But normally what we spray for other diseases is a product called EBDC or maintaince, and there's various forms of that product or formulations that you can use, and that works really well on the anthracnose and bunch rot stuff. But this Elevate 50 and the sulfur you can use later in the season, the Manzate, it's got like a 66-day PHI or something. So that's really only good for the early season diseases.
Yeah, PHI being your pre-harvest interval. A lot of these companies and stuff do these things where they test the product to say, okay, well, how long will the product be remaining on the berries, or things like that. That way when they harvest it, there's no residues left on the berries. It's either washed off, they're just metabolized by the plant. There's nothing left inside the grapes and things like that. So that's what the pre-harvest interval indicates, and so they've done a testing to verify that. So
yeah, and we're usually pretty conservative on that anyway. What we were probably this year almost 90 days out last application of Manzate to when we harvested.
What's part of the reason for that, David?
Part of the reason for that was that someone,
back to that potassium,
could have been anyone, didn't fertilize with enough potassium. So I had applied manure along with Dad and my brother Lawrence, and we put manure, like we spread manure by hand out in the orchard because we can't get a manure spreader out there. So we were wheelbarrowing it around and in buckets and stuff. And I thought we would get enough potassium and other micronutrient release from that, but it must have been a little too tied up yet. Didn't break down enough to get into the soil. So we were a little short on potassium, which is really important for accumulating sugar in the fruit. And so our berries weren't really sugaring up the way they should have been. So we ended up putting on a late application of potassium. I mixed some liquid potassium fertilizer in with some water and put that by the plants. I don't know if it helped or not. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but we probably harvested 3 weeks later than we normally would have, just because the plants were a little slower to sugar up this year.
Yeah, and when I was doing my bricks testing and stuff like that on the wine batches as I was going, the majority of them did have similar bricks for the different cultivars as we would typically have. I know I think it was the Prairie Star that had like 22 bricks. That was doing really good and had a nice bricks count. Bricks being the amount of sugar that's kind of in the juice. And there's one, though, that I've even mixed them with some stuff. I think it might be the Louis Swenson, maybe, was not quite as high in the bricks. I think it was closer to like a 17. There was like a 17 or 16 in there, one of the grapes that I was mixing. So my wine batches had dropped a little bit, and a lot of my alcohol by volumes are only like 9, 10, 8.5.
Oh, easier to drink then, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a couple batches that are going to be like 9 or 10.5, 11. But so the content of alcohol has decreased a little bit in the wine this year, in general. But I could add some sugar ahead of time and ferment it with it. But why put in the input?
So yeah, back to the harvesting of it, right? So we've had buyers for our grapes in the past that were not able to take the grapes this year due to surplus inventory. For the one place, and then the other place just wasn't sure if they could take on additional products to make at this time.
Yeah, they were having a little economic hardship in terms of they had a couple batches that turned bad, and so they had all that input into that, and then so they lost basically, I don't know, 500 gallons of product or whatever. So that was a lot of income that they were counting on that they lost, and so they're trying to slowly try to find ways to gain back the income. They had like membership drives where they would like, hey, if you want to be a $100 member, we'll give you a free T-shirt. Of course, then it's $75 profit right there. So, and then there's like member perks, like you get a free glass, or a punch card or something like that. Or so they're trying to do some ways where you get an exclusive cup, for being a member, while making additional funds. And so they weren't sure if they could, it was like about a month prior to harvest, they weren't sure if they could take on the grapes juice that we had given them or sold to them in the previous year. They said it was really good stuff, and I think it panned out really nice. It's just that they didn't know if they could purchase it at that time or something like that. So, or where their company was going.
In previous years, before we found this second buyer last year, we'd asked probably maybe half a dozen to 8 places. No one wanted the grapes. So these 2 places didn't want it again, and so I said, well, let's just juice it all. We'll just use it. It's fine. It's probably a bumper crop too.
Yeah. So last year we sold all the reds, and so we had a lot of white wine, and I think we sold 60, 70 gallons. No.
Yeah, I think it was 60 something. Yeah.
Yeah, we sold like 60 gallons of red wine, grape juice, of Sabravois, and the Valiant, the King of the North to this group. And I think I had like 4 batches of wine and 20 gallons of white grapes, 25.
Yep. And then we also, freeze and can some for juice. But this year we ended up with over 200 gallons of juice. Around 215, something like that.
That was just the
And
wine or grapes.
that was just grapes. Yep. And so we're looking at Joe like, ooh, how much wine can you make, man?
we ended up with 70 gallons of wine. Well, currently some of it's still fermenting, or whatever, but we're getting the bottling process. But so yeah, like triple my regular routine amount of wine.
And then, so we had mom was canning juice in the kitchen while we're doing this. And, I just want to put a huge shout out to everyone that came help us pick, because that was a lot of grapes to pick and press. And we picked, a few people picked a little bit during the week while we were not there yet. And then on the weekend, we picked all these grapes and pressed them all the same day. And so I was basically just shuttling grapes back and forth to, crates out to the vineyard orchard, and then hauling the grapes back to Joe and Brandon that were doing the pressing, and Lawrence. And so just a shout out to our neighborhood friends and family that came and helped us pick, made life a lot easier for us.
Yeah, so you had 3 people in the pressing room. Then you had anywhere from 3 to 9 at one point, maybe, was it? How many people do you have pick in total?
Oh yeah, we probably had at least 10 out there in the morning, and then people have other things to do, right? So then we probably only had 4 for the last couple hours in the afternoon.
Yeah, some showed up just for the afternoon, some showed up just for the morning.
Yeah,
we owe them a couple bottles of wine. We had one group or one family that came with they have 7 kids or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, the wife kind of stayed around the house and went out to the orchard once in a while, played on the playground, kind of walked around, and husband was picking, and we ended up giving them, I don't know, 15 gallons of juice, I think, or something like that to bring home.
Yeah, I think it was 25.
Was it 25? Yeah,
Yeah,
towards the end
so,
there, I'm like, I can't press it. I can't do anything more with wine. And, I'm pretty much maxed out. So it was like kind of like, hey, you were here basically all day, darn near. So here you go.
Yeah, so we gave to the people that were helping pick. I think we gave at least 40 gallons or more of juice to people that were helping pick. And some of them were more interested in Joe's wine at the end than juice. So
yeah, so I got to spare a couple bottles, which I think I can manage. Yep. Yeah, so that's kind of how this year went, I guess, as far as wine goes. I know it was kind of neat though, because usually I had just the white or limited cultivars to be able to kind of blend in for different wines and stuff. So like this year we actually had, it was a bumper crop because we were able to do Brianna all by itself, which I hadn't done for 4 or 5 years, and Brianna by itself always turned out pretty nice. And then we did Prairie Star cultivar all by itself. That one we usually just mix with other things. I've never really tried doing it by itself, but we had enough of it, so I'm like, hey, let's try Prairie Star by itself. We did a Prairie Star, Louis Swenson mix. We did a Prairie Star, Louis Swenson, St. Croix mix. We did Louis Swenson by itself. So I'm messing around with all these, like, hey, 2 gallons, 2 gallons, 2 gallons for a third apiece for the 6-gallon batch and things like that. So we have quite a few different mixes this year compared to like last year and the year before. It's usually like a couple 50-50 mixes, maybe a full one here and there. Like I'm going to do a Sabravois, by itself, a Valiant by itself, and I actually had enough to mix those two together, so that could be interesting. I recently re-racked a Prairie Star Sab, I think. Yeah, Prairie Star Sab and Valiant, which I'd probably say might be our 3 best flavors, I feel like. Although the Sabravois, dude, I don't know what's up with that, but anytime I ferment that thing, it's kind of smells just off. It just smells nasty. You open that bucket up for the first time, and anything that had Sabravois mixed in it just smelled gross. Like you're like, ooh, this is not gonna taste good. And every time after it ages a little bit, the smell goes away, and it tastes great. So I don't know what the deal is with it, but every time that cultivar.
I have read that Sabravois wines you're supposed to let age a little bit, so maybe there is something to that actually.
Yeah, it could be because it just smells stanky. But and then one unique one that I wasn't really planning on is that I brought back a 5-gallon bucket of Bluebell wine or Bluebell juice. Then we're gonna can it back home, and then it started fermenting on me before I could actually can it. So I was like, no. So I was like, well, I'm just going to add my commercial yeast to it to kind of hopefully counteract sometimes the floral notes that you can get from your wild yeast. And so I added that to it, and I just made a Bluebell wine. And I think that one's only like 7.5%, which is weird because Bluebell is usually pretty sweet grape.
Right. But going back to, David's screw up, Bluebell, I think, is the one that gets most negatively impacted by being short on potassium.
Ah.
That's the one I usually see the most deficiencies in.
Gotcha. Well, that kind of makes sense because I was like, gosh, that seems like it's really low sugar content for a Bluebell, That makes sense, I guess. But I tested it, when I first re-rack it, and then again to kind of see how much sugar I want to add to it or back sweeten it with, And it wasn't very sweet, but it was very smooth. Like, kind of just ran down the palate nice, It wasn't like some of these ones that have a little bit of a tang on the backside or something like that. This one just kind of drank it. It was like, that's really smooth. But anyways, that'll be an interesting one to try out. It's a lot of new things happening when it comes to the wine this year.
Yeah, so in addition to doing grape juice and wine, we also do hard cider. Joe does some hard cider, and the rest of the family, we like to drink non-alcoholic as well. So we don't have a lot of apples in the orchard yet that are producing well. They're pretty small, and I've been really struggling to keep them alive between the voles, and somehow I got fire blight introduced into the orchard here too. So I ripped out the one plant that had that first one that I thought had it, but then I must have introduced it to a few other plants inadvertently. And so I might have to pull out a few more trees and kind of see what happens there, I guess. But
fire blight, though, Dave, you shouldn't need to do it. You should need to pull out the whole plant. You should be able to kind of just cleanse and your pruner and bleach it or something like that and cut that specific limb off. You might be able to keep it, But,
so that tree in particular was small enough that it was in the main branches and stuff.
Oh.
Yeah. So that one I ripped out. These are small trees, but Joe's right. If it's a larger tree and it's just on one branch or something, yeah, you can just go back far enough, probably cut it off, and you'll be fine. These were pretty small trees, and I didn't feel like I was going to be able to, prune it and keep it.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know what fire blight is, it kind of just looks like, start off at the tip of the branch and just kind of start dying, turning into necrotic, and it'll kind of work its way, kind of just a little bit blackish, kind of works its way down a limb. So if you have like one little branch, one little limb that's kind of just looking off and like it's dying, if you do take a pruners, you can cut kind of in the middle of that. And if you see, like, as you cut it, you kind of stick it back to each other and pull it away, you see this bacterial ooze that kind of stick to the ends that you cut, then it's probably fire blight, as it's bacterial borne or bacterial pathogen. That's how you can kind of tell. So, but then clean your pruners and then snip back to the healthy tissue, and it should alleviate any problems on mature trees.
Yes, yeah. And some varieties are more susceptible than others, that kind of deal. But yeah, you definitely don't want to introduce that to your orchard. So if you're ever out pruning, trees for somebody else, and you don't really know what they have as far as disease or anything like that, you might just make sure you clean your pruners, sanitize them before you go back to your own orchard. Not saying that's how I got it in ours, but we got it somehow.
Yeah.
But anyway, so normally we pick a lot of apples from the farm, like out in the pasture. We have all these random apples growing out there. Didn't really get a lot from that this year, but we did get, a few from some family members, some other, people that just didn't use their apples. So up at the farm, we pressed the one weekend and, probably got like 40, 45 gallons of juice.
Yeah, I think I had 45 gallons of cider I'm making from that, and then we had like another pail or two, so yeah, 50 gallons or so.
50 gallons or so up at the farm. And so we have a hydro press and grinder up there that we use. The hydro press is the same one we use for the grapes. But then I bought a hydro press as well off an auction a couple of years ago that I keep in Renville. And in Renville this year, just a lot of apples in the area. And so my wife just put a little Facebook post out there that if anyone isn't going to use their apples, my husband would come pick them and stuff because he makes juice. And I must have went to almost 2 dozen trees this year picking apples, and some of them didn't have but some of them had a lot. And so in Renville at my house, I pressed probably around 90 gallons of juice this year, which if that's a lot. I had to go get a second little freezer just to freeze some of this juice. And, I give some to some neighbors and stuff too, but, it's just nice to be able to use some of these apples that would otherwise just be going out to the compost pile or whatever. And, I got a lot of apples still in boxes that I'm going to store in the garage here for the winter, eat some of those, make applesauce for the kids, that kind of thing. So big bumper crop for apple juice this year.
Yeah, a lot of apple juice, applesauce, all the good stuff. Freeze some, can some, and this and that. So, yeah, some people have a preference to freeze them versus canning them. I mean, you cook down some of your enzymes and stuff like that within the juice, and you get a slightly different flavor, perhaps, if you cook it and you can it up, But if you freeze it, sometimes you keep a little bit of that intact. It seems like it might taste a little bit more fresh, per se, or something like that. But that's all different philosophies in terms of how you want to keep your food. Do you want it processed or not? Is cooking it, canning it, processing it? Is freezing it, processing it? There's different philosophies out there in terms of what's most nutritious for you. But I don't know if we really care too much how we do it. It's still good. Still homegrown, right? Still from the pasture, where that came from. So I mean, yeah. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what how the orchard went this year. Some issues and things we had to work through, and definitely some bumper crops happening in there this year in terms of things with the nice cool weather. Some disease incidents, unfortunately, because of that. But it's great to be able to produce some of your own juice. One of the benefits too of that, I guess, is that Dad has pigs on the farm, and so when we have press all this juice with the bladder press and hydro press and stuff, we have this extra pulp that gets, will be discarded probably, or in a commercial setting would probably just go to the landfill, or maybe they have some other contract with a dairy farmer or something where they bring his apples to or something like that. But we just have the tractor sitting there, the bucket on it, and we wheelbarrow, the scraps in there, and we go dump them and feed them to the cows. We'll go feed some of the grape pulp and apple pulp over to the pigs and things like that. So it's kind of like a full cycle, which is kind of cool, is that we produce the crop, we get the end product of the juice, the byproduct of the juice being the pulp, goes back into the feed, animals and livestock. Livestock in turn also feed us, so it's kind of a nice little circle and cycle, holistic kind of thing, In a sense, I also thought it was kind of cool how we grew up basically on a self-sustaining farm, right? All of our meat, came from us. All our vegetables came from mom's garden. Scraps from the garden also in turn fed the pigs, and things like that. It's one thing pigs are really good for. It'd be expensive to raise and stuff, but they help clean up quite a bit.
You can get a lot of feed value from garden produce that would otherwise just be composted to the pigs. And another thing we had was a lot of fruit on the farm growing up. And a lot of it was wild fruit. We had wild plums and blackberries and gooseberries and grapes, apples. But now we're just getting a little bigger, a little better maybe production, and got more mouths to feed now.
Yeah, true. Yeah, what are we up to? I think latest
20 grandkids.
20, yeah, that's what I was thinking. 20 grandkids. So there's a lot of mouths to feed there. It's only getting bigger, so hopefully that's something that we can kind of keep producing for our family and keep producing, and hopefully in the future it'll be all the grandkids come up, help pick apples and things like that, and once they spring and off into the world there, that they may keep coming back and through and make it a thing. So yeah, help support the generations, and also help support the podcast. Download, rate, all the good stuff. I hate plugging for myself. I'm not a salesman. Don't like doing it, but feel free to rate, leave a comment. David's over there giggling to himself because he knows how much I hate doing this. But and if you are listening to, sometimes you can just stream it, but actually download it. Because I use this program called Buzzsprout that only keeps track of the downloads. And so when I'm talking, how 25% of my listeners come from the Twin Cities area, metro area, that it's the downloads that I kind of count. It's not necessarily the stream. So if you're willing to actually download it and kind of help you keep a little bit more on track with some of those statistics, kind of cool to know. So anyways, thank you all for listening. Hope you guys got a kick out of this little episode here. And yeah, until next time.